All right, I'm just waiting for a few more people to enter the webinar, so I'll just sit here awkwardly for a few more seconds. All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for attending this evening's information session on Churchill Fellowships. My name's Adam Davey. I'm CEO of the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. We're based in Canberra, ACT, Ngunnawal country, and I'm going to begin this information session with an overview of what Churchill Fellowships are all about, how you apply, and a few tips about the sorts of things we're looking for. Before we get underway, I do like to acknowledge Australia's First Nations people, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging. And I would also like to extend that acknowledgement and thanks to all Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people who are attending this webinar this evening. A little bit of housekeeping. You will be able to ask questions via the Q&A function. You can type your question at any time. We are going to leave the bulk of the questions until the end after our two speakers have presented. If we're getting a lot of questions, my colleague who's hosting the webinar and I may answer a few questions in the background quietly. You'll be able to see all answered questions. If you don't get a chance to get your question answered, or you think of a question later on after the webinar is finished, you'll be able to get in touch with the Trust and ask those questions at any time. So just before we get underway with my presentation, we're going to run a short poll. So it's interactive. You get to tell us what state or territory you're zooming in from and where you heard about this session. So that should appear on your screens shortly. So when you see that, please fill that poll out. All right, so I'll get underway with my presentation. A little bit of history about Churchill Fellowships is always important, and I get lots of questions about people who've never heard of them before. So if that's you, welcome. You may not know that when Sir Winston Churchill resigned as British Prime Minister in 1955, at the age of 80, he had served under 5 reigning monarchs. He'd survived 3 wars. He'd been a writer, a journalist, an historian, an adventurer. He even won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1953. So as you would imagine, there was a widespread desire to honour Sir Winston Churchill and capture the essence of his public service, his inspiration, his intellect, and even his humour for generations to come. Now, of course, these days we acknowledge that Sir Winston wasn't perfect, and you can read some really insightful essays that we commissioned, which are on our website, that explore Winston Churchill through a contemporary lens. But it's important that we do remember Sir Winston, and he was readily someone who believed that anything was possible if you put your minds to it, and that the greatest figures in history were those who made a contribution to their fellow countrymen and to public service. So when Prime Minister Menzies announced the news of Sir Winston's death to Australians in January 1965, he also simultaneously announced a fundraising appeal to establish the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust and launch this concept of Churchill Fellowships. And on 28th of February 1965, we call that Churchill Memorial Sunday, there was a door knock appeal, which was huge. There were over 220,000 volunteers involved in that door knock appeal. And the money that was donated by Australians, combined with contributions from governments and business, amassed something like $4 million, about £2.2 million. And that corpus, those funds, I guess the basis of the Trust's funds for Churchill Fellowships today. It's the only time in history that banks opened on a Sunday so they could receive all that money. So it's a significant part of our history. And we like to think of the Churchill Trust as the people's trust, given the support and where the money came from. So if you have a passion for a subject and you want to investigate it overseas, and you know what you're striving to achieve, and you want to make a difference in your community, then a Churchill Fellowship may be the opportunity you've been looking for. So who are these Churchill Fellows? Well, if you're motivated to bring about change and improve outcomes for people or the planet, then consider applying. Churchill Fellows are the types of people who are passionate and committed to an issue. And it could be any issue, and I'll talk about that as well. They want to learn and share knowledge so that others in their community might benefit. And here's that poll. So please appreciate it if you could fill that out for us. It helps us do a better job in terms of reaching more and more Australians. So Churchill Fellowships, what are they? Well, a Churchill Fellowship, it's really unique and it's a prestigious opportunity that's open to Australians from all walks of life. So it's not an academic scholarship. You don't need to have attained any particular educational qualification. You don't have to have finished year 10. Like, we don't care about that. So that's quite unusual. It's not a funding grant. So yes, we grant money. The whole Churchill Fellowship is fully funded, but we don't ask you to come back and acquit every cent you spend on accommodation or food. There's a lot of freedom and empowerment that comes with being awarded a Churchill Fellowship. So it's more than a study abroad program. It's an opportunity to become an expert in your field and join an international as well as a national cohort of experts. A Churchill Fellowship does not need to comprise formal research. It can, but it doesn't need to. So you could use a Churchill Fellowship to learn new skills. You could go somewhere and undertake a specific piece of training or a course, or you can use it to build networks and observe best practice in your chosen field. So the Churchill Fellowship is inherently for overseas travel between 4 to 8 weeks, and you take that in one continuous journey. There are some exceptions to this, which I'll talk about shortly. We've awarded over 4,500 Churchill Fellowships since 1965. And each year we typically aim to award around 100 more. Churchill Fellows travel across the globe on the widest range and depth of topics and bring back to this country information, networks, projects, products, ideas, innovations, things that are, really making this country stronger. So in terms of being eligible, look, you need to be an Australian citizen or a permanent resident, and you need to be 18 years of age by the application closing date, which this year is 1 May. You need to be able to travel overseas, and I think it's important to know if you have a disability that makes that a challenge and you might need a carer to go with you, we can accommodate that. You just need to let us know. We now also offer virtual research options for people who can't travel. Again, it may be through a disability or it might be a caring responsibility. So we don't want you to miss out on this opportunity. So you can apply to do virtual research. And we had great success during the height of COVID when you couldn't travel internationally. And some of our fellows, they needed to get on with their projects, and they did all of their Churchill Fellowship virtually through meetings like this. Or actually two-way meetings, obviously, where they're talking and meeting with people. They were remarkably successful. So we are definitely open to that where it's something that will make a difference for you. And for people living in very remote parts of Australia, we're now allowing domestic travel. So this is in recognition of the challenges that people in very, very remote parts of Australia face, leaving their communities for a range of different reasons, and recognising that there still is a lot of benefit for people in that situation to learn more from within Australia. But for the majority of us not living in very remote Australia, we obviously expect that you will have taken those opportunities to learn what's happening in Australia, and you're telling us that you need to learn things overseas you can't learn here. So another thing to mention is that a Churchill Fellowship is an individual award. So if you're a research team, I'm sorry, you can't apply as a team. So it's not like an academic grant or a research grant. This is an individual award, but you can come back and collaborate and work with your team. That's not a problem. That's what this is all about. When you come back, it's about implementing your ideas and your recommendations, making change, making a difference. Keeping that in mind, we do support joint applications between Indigenous and non-Indigenous applicants where their proposed research or fellowship project is primarily on First Nations business. And there's reasons for that, and there are benefits that we've seen in those collaborative arrangements. And if you think that's you, get in touch with us and talk to us. We'll explain how that works. But in a nutshell, both applicants are awarded a Churchill Fellowship, and they collaborate on the same project. And we've got a joint fellowship we awarded last year we can refer to as an example for you. If you're undertaking tertiary studies, that's perfectly fine. However, your proposed project can't be used to directly form part of that tertiary study. So you can't use your Churchill Fellowship project and report and submit it to be assessed as part of your PhD or Master's. That's not what it's for. In fact, the reason for that is we want you to commit 100% to your Churchill Fellowship project. So when you come back, you're giving all of your attention that you can to making those changes you wanted to do. Now, it's not uncommon for people to do a Churchill Fellowship, then down the track, go on to some kind of formal study. That's fine. And it might expand and build on your Churchill Fellowship. And the other way around, sometimes people have done some tertiary study, and then their fellowship helps them carry that thinking and line of inquiry even further. But at the end of the day, what we're looking for are projects that can result in change on the ground, sort of not just kind of theoretical, exploratory kind of projects. So importantly, Churchill Fellowships are an opportunity for people from all walks of life. And that is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot, but that is the Churchill Trust's mantra. We're doing a lot of things to ensure that we're reaching people from all corners of the country, from all backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, cultural diversity, a whole range of areas that we are really trying to make sure we reach. So I think, I'd like to say that if you think maybe, I don't think the Churchill Fellowships are people like me, well, I'll challenge that and say I'm not so sure that that's correct, because a Churchill Fellowship really is intended to be for everyone. So in terms of project eligibility, your project has to be suitable for a fellowship. And by that, it means there needs to be a demonstrable benefit to the Australian community. So a Churchill Fellowship will result in significant individual benefit, leadership, transformation, self-belief. It's amazing. But it also needs to be something that's going to benefit the community. So that might mean bringing back and sharing your knowledge, your ideas, your practices, or your skills, and that can be done in many different ways. You have to demonstrate that you have explored your topic in Australia and that you've identified a need to travel overseas. We don't want to pay, $30,000 to send someone on this amazing journey around the world to find out they could have learned what they needed to know in Queanbeyan near Canberra. I mean, that's not what we want to do. The project has to be a self-contained project. So I mentioned it can't be, literally part of a university degree. It also can't be sort of an add-on to another organisation's funded project. So we're not, an external travel budget that you can tap into. A Churchill Fellowship is really here for people that might not otherwise get that opportunity. People often ask, does your Churchill Fellowship project have to relate to your employment? Well, the answer is no, but it's not at all uncommon for that to be the case. In fact, most people, I think, are applying for a Churchill Fellowship in a topic or area related to their employment, because I guess, frankly, if you're working at the coalface involved in something, not only are you probably passionate about it, you also can see ways that you can influence the systems you work in and influence and make change. So it's not uncommon, but you might have a passion outside of your work that's equally valid and that you can see opportunities to influence and make change there. That's perfectly fine. You might not have a job, and that's also perfectly fine. So we don't set the limit on topics, and that really is the strength of Churchill Fellowships. It's also a challenge because, we get an amazing, absolutely incredible range of and depth of projects and topics, and it's incredible. We don't have a particular field that we set the direction. That said, we do have some what we call sponsored fellowships, and these are fellowships that are quite special because they're either the result of a bequest where someone's left some money in their will for the trust, and they said, I really want to see people doing Churchill Fellowships on these particular projects. or it might be an organisation. It could be a government department, it could be a private organisation, it could be an individual who's generously donating money to the trust, and they would like to see Churchill Fellowships undertaken on specific topics. So what that means is you can, when you're filling out your application, you can select one of these sponsored fellowships, or actually up to 2 that you'd like to be considered for. But this always confuses people a little bit, and they get a bit worked up over it. So what I'm going to say is, please feel free to select sponsor fellowships or don't. We'll know when we're assessing the applications if the project is a good fit, and so we'll allocate them anyway. It just helps us get to them a bit more quickly. So don't lose any sleep about whether you should select one or not. And importantly, if you select a couple of sponsor fellowships, it doesn't rule you out from being considered for just a general fellowship. So it won't impact you positively or negatively. That said, we do have some sponsor fellowships that are on have some quite specific requirements around them. So, for example, if you live in Tumut, there's the Blakely Miller Foundation Churchill Fellowship, which is specifically for people who live in Tumut and the surrounding areas in New South Wales, and their projects need to benefit education, health and environment for that community. So that's quite specific. So if you do live in that area, get in there and have a crack, because there's obviously not as big a field of applicants there, and you've got a really good chance to benefit your community with the support of the Blakely Miller Foundation behind you. And similarly, we've got the Barbara Dunstan Fellowship for themes on peace and reconciliation. Barbara is a Churchill Fellowship fellow herself, and she's generously sponsoring fellowships to see her son, to see people do projects in peace and reconciliation. The Lord Mayor's Bushfire Appeal, the NRMA ACT Road Safety Trust, there's a lot of them. And if you go to our website and look under sponsor fellowships, you'll see them there. So in terms of applying, as you would expect in 2023, you apply online. Applications open this Wednesday, so the form is not there now, you won't see it, but on Wednesday you will see it. If you go to our website, churchillfellowships.com.au, there's a menu button up the top called Become a Fellow. All I can say is go to that part of the website, read all the material we've got in there and linked in there, because everything you need to know is there already. The questions that are asked, the questions your referees are asked, everything you need to know is there. So definitely, if you haven't had a poke through that, have a poke through it. It'll remain there throughout the whole application round. So when you apply using the form, it's one of those types where you can log in and you can save and exit as many times as you want. So you're going to have a couple of months to finalise the application. That sounds like a long time. Number one tip, don't leave it to the last minute. Get in there as soon as you can, register your application, start it, have a think about it, and use that time wisely. I don't think anyone's ever been highly successful leaving it to the last week and starting their application. If you can't use our online form, there might be a technical reason. You might have a screen reader that's not compatible with it or something like that. Get in touch with us, let us know. We've got ways that we can work with you to find alternative solutions to the form. We don't want someone to not be able to apply because they couldn't use our form. It's competitive, so you've got to remember to ask yourself, how are you going to convince the selectors to invest in you and your project idea? Because that's what we're doing. We're investing in you and your idea. So it's pretty amazing when you get awarded to know that someone has invested in you and your idea. This year, we've added something new, so some of you will have applied previously. It's a 60-second video pitch, and this is all integrated into the application form process. All you need is the technology you're probably using tonight, a camera and a microphone, so you can use your smartphone, you can use your laptop, you can use your PC, your iPad, whatever. And that's a 60-second pitch to tell us a bit about you, a bit about your project, why it's important to you, and what you think the benefits will be to the community. So for some people, this could be really something that makes a big difference in terms of whether you get shortlisted for an interview or not. It's your chance to be authentic and get your message across. If you're not really great at video or confident, don't worry, because the written application is exactly the same as it has been previously. We just added this video pitch to it as an opportunity for people who maybe don't find the written process quite as convincing. You'll need 2 references, someone who can vouch for you personally and someone that can vouch for the validity of your project. or the importance of your project to the community. So again, another important tip, think quickly and early about who could be your referees, get in touch with them, make sure they're happy to do it, and find out when they're going to be around between now and 1 May. It's very sad, but every year on the closing date, we get calls from people who have done their application and they're waiting on a referee. We can't hold the application process over. After 1 May, it's done. You'll have to wait till next year. So don't get let down by your referees. That means communicating with them early, finding out when they're around, chasing them up. They fill out an online form as well. They get sent a text message and an email through the application form system. So it's pretty easy for them. They just answer some questions online. But that's an important tip. Think about your referees and get onto that early. So you will be asked in your application to form an itinerary. So this is the really cool bit. It's like a choose your own adventure. You're telling us which countries you want to go to, which people you want to meet with, which organizations you want to visit, what course you want to do, what that looks like between 4 and 8 weeks. It's pretty exciting. The temptation is to put too many countries and cities into your itinerary. So think carefully about, limiting it to the ones that are most important to you and allowing some time for those meetings that you won't expect to get, because there will be meetings that you didn't know you were going to get. Once you get in another country and you're meeting and talking to people, you'll find these amazing opportunities just arise. So you need to put some time in your itinerary for those meetings, time to sit down and digest your thoughts, write some notes, time to have a weekend to experience the culture of the country you're in, to understand the context of all these things you're learning. So you don't get a prize for putting the most number of countries down. You get a prize for having a really well thought out itinerary and being able to tell us, this is why I want to go here. This is why I want to go there. This is what I hope to learn. This is what I hope to find out. And you might not know what you don't know, but you need to be able to explain why you want to go there. Don't worry about trying to cost the travel. So a lot of people will contact us and say, I don't know how to calculate, the airfares and the accommodation. You don't do that. You just worry about where you want to go. We do that in the background. So that should be a weight off your shoulders if you're thinking that was you. This year, you'll be able to depart from 1 November. So if you've got a project where you really want to get going, we're not going to hold you up. You'll find out about your fellowship in mid to late September. We're holding, again, another first this year, an onboarding session on the 6th of October in Canberra. So we're going to bring 100 fellows in to network, to meet each other, to do some training in certain things that we think will be very valuable for your fellowship experience. So it's going to be pretty amazing. So if you're feeling confident, just put a little diary note there for 6th of October. And then you'll be able to go from 1 November. You'll have 12 months from which to depart Australia. So we give you a 12-month window from 1 November to start your fellowship travel. So the selection process, as you'd expect, we've got selection panels and committees in each state and territory, and those panels and committees comprise people with experience across a range of different areas. We have our own internal system of categorising applications, so it might be health and medicine or arts or community service, whatever it is. That really helps us make sure that in the larger states, your application is assessed by the people that will probably do the best justice to it because they have a really good understanding of that area. That said, don't assume that people assessing your application know what you're talking about. Don't fall for the trap of using jargon and acronyms. So tempting because, we do it all the time in our jobs. But if you do it in an application and, the people assessing it like scratching their head, it's not going to go as well for you as you would have hoped. Now, that said, be aware that all of our assessors are pretty good at researching online. So they'll, look into the claims you're making and the things that you pose to fully understand and assess your application. But try really to avoid jargon and acronyms. Our website will include all of the dates for interviews. They're just starting to be locked in now. So that way you'll be able to be clear. But most of the interviews will happen in the second half of June and throughout July. In New South Wales and Victoria, there's 2 rounds of interviews, a first interview and then a second interview. typically in other states, it's just one interview. So we find that in a normal year we get around 1,000 to 1,100 applications, and we award around 100 or more fellowships. So it gives you a sense of the odds, I suppose, if you look at it that way. If you make it to an interview, it's a significant achievement. So most of the people I think that get to interview do end up getting a fellowship, but not everyone, of course. So the selection recommendations from all of those committees and panels go to our board, and they're finalised in September. So I think a little bit of a hint about our selection criteria and tips around that. We have two halves to our selection criteria, the project and the person. So that's kind of gives you a big idea of what we're looking at. The criteria is on the screen at the moment. So for the project, in terms of the need for your project, think about and explain what's compelling about your project. Like, why do we want to get excited about? Why do we want to feel that that's really important? Is there a burning platform? Is there something happening that now is the time for Australia to get this knowledge and do something with it? Specifically, who's going to benefit if you do this project and come back and share that knowledge? Who's going to benefit and why will they benefit? Your itinerary, I spoke about that. Just be really clear on your focus. Where do you want to go? Why do you want to go? What's the need to go there? Why have you chosen those places? Now, what you don't need to do, and people often ask this, you don't need to have contacted the people or organisations you want to meet with in other countries and lock those meetings in. You don't have to have done that, right? So you do that once you've been awarded the fellowship. So that's an important thing to be aware of. And finally, achievability. So we want to believe, and you need to convince us that you're in a position to do what you set out to do. So if you say my project aims to do this or this, then we need to believe that you're able to do this and this. So if you set a really massive, goal, you need to be able to convince us that you're going to be able to do that. And that gets to the personal side. So why you? How can you convince us that you're the right person to undertake this project? Keep in mind, there might be many other people applying who are wanting to do something similar. How are you best placed to come back and implement change or influence others? So that means have a plan. And your application form, the questions will ask you effectively, what will you do when you come back? How are you going to share this knowledge? What's your plan? So you need to have a clear plan on what you're going to do. Your plan shouldn't be, I'll publish a journal article, because that's not good enough. So, these are worth around $30,000. It's a big commitment of time and effort from you. Getting one journal article published is not really going to lead to the kind of impact we're hoping for. So think broadly about how you can disseminate your findings and how you might be able to get some impact. You'll be expected to write a report, or it could be a podcast or an audio report or a video. That's up to you, but it needs to be of a good quality. And we are now offering a lot of post-travel opportunities. You can apply for additional funding to help you share your findings. We've got impact funding for fellows who are trying to implement some of the great ideas they learned, and they need funding to help them do that. So there's a lot more than just the overseas travel component. It's a pretty big thing. It's not an overseas junket or a holiday. It's an investment in your passion and your energy. So remember, it is a competitive process. Churchill Fellowships are prestigious. They open doors, and they literally do overseas. You'll get meetings you probably couldn't think you'd get because you've got a Churchill Fellowship. When you come back, you'll have a platform, more people will be listening to you. They're well funded and they're highly contested. So it's not a reason to be shy. It's a reason to put in the best effort into your application that you can. So spend the time editing it, refining it, doing your best in your application. The Churchill Trust team is fairly small, but we're always available during business hours to answer the phone. We've got a very informative website. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time with your questions. So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and introduce our first Churchill Fellow speaker, Angela O'Connor. Angela's joining us from Western Australia, and she's a recipient of the Churchill Fellows Association of Western Australia. So we have alumni associations in each state and territory. Fellowship to establish the first She-Way program for pregnant women with alcohol and other drug use. So Angela's passionate about women's health, and in particular advocating for vulnerable women, infants and their families. And currently Angela is the clinical lead for a relocation project for King Edward Memorial Hospital. So thanks very much for joining us, Angela, and I hand over to you.
Thank you, Adam, and good evening, everyone. And that was a great introduction. My name is Angela O'Connor, and I want to take you through my journey of my Winston Churchill Fellowship. I started out with the goal to complete a feasibility studies. As Adam has said, I work in the area. I was really passionate about pregnant women who have got complex needs associated with drug and alcohol issues, family domestic violence, and complex trauma. And the countries that I thought was best suited, because I had met some researchers, I had done a lot of background work, and I believe that Canada and the US models were really comparative to the services that we use and we run in Western Australia. And they had a high level numbers of Indigenous people associated with their care models, and we actually have the same. So my goal then was to look at a model that would assist me in changing how we do things, the impact of drug use, and I'm talking complex drug use, on pregnant women. So my story was that I set out, and these are just a few of the key people to help me along my way. I visited the She Way program in downtown Vancouver. And just before I got there, I missed out on Kate and Will. They had just done a visit. So I timed my timing very poorly there. But this team were just fantastic. They opened the doors. Their passion for what they do, delivering this service all under one roof, was a fantastic goal that I wanted to explore. I also went to the Maxine Wright Foundation, and Maxine Wright has done a huge body of work in Canada. And bearing in mind, when I went in 2017, there was a huge fentanyl crisis and people were collapsing on the street from overdosing from either prescriptive opiates and non-prescriptive opiates. The really relevant and great thing that happened for me in the timing was that in Maxine Wright in the Eteria, they had just opened the first women's only community accessible overdose prevention site, and it's called Sister Space. And they allowed me, and that's what Adam was saying, the doors open for you when you are a fellow. And so I was able to go in there, speak to people, observe how they did it. The other person that I really wanted to give thanks to, I went off to Seattle and I met Caroline Hartness, who is an Indigenous American Indian. And Caroline invited me to Bainbridge Island to meet at her home place and also to speak to people. And she's done a huge amount of work in the area of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And in Australia, we have a huge problem with FASD. And the work that James Fitzpatrick and Caroline have done and informed that research and change that we can bring about in this space to help people through this journey. The highlights for me was there was an opportunity, and I really encourage all of you, it was to meet with services that provide holistic trauma-informed care. And trauma-informed care was kind of a new concept in Western Australia, and I really wanted to build on this and make changes to do services under one roof. The privilege to attend their clinics and share stories and looking at the wraparound care that they do was really phenomenal. And the opportunity to meet with clinicians and researchers. I went to see the university, I went to Toronto and met with researchers there in the early stages of development for children who have issues following prenatal exposure to substances. The outcomes, of course, for me was to look at this trauma-informed care, AOD use, alcohol and other drug use, and to note of the comparison between Indigenous people around the world are rebuilding from the harmful effects of intergenerational drug and alcohol use and trauma. And then the infants that are exposed, the trauma and the buildup of that follows them sometimes throughout their lifespan, and it leads to poor infant mental health. We also see a high level of children being removed out of home care, and services sometimes are fragmented, and it causes fragmentation and also that linkages that we need to keep families together. But the key message here was that really the exposure prenatally to drug and alcohol can affect developmental outcomes, and we need always to work together to improve that. When I started off on my journey, I really thought that, you know, we were like centre with the largest drug and alcohol service in Australia. And I thought we were doing really well. But what I realized is that no single agency can do this alone. We really are better together. We need to improve outcomes for families affected by prenatal and alcohol and other drug use. And we work with child protection services in a positive way. We work with rehab. We work with justice. We do an in-reach program into the women's prisons. Healthcare is my background, and also the importance of linking in with kinship and keeping families together. The benefits that I see from a Churchill Fellowship that I really, really would like all of us to consider here, that a Winston Churchill Fellowship is viewed as a very prestigious award. I was working as the CMC, so I'm the manager of a multidisciplinary team. When I applied and was successful, this everyone wanted to know about the work that we were doing. It almost helped put our service and the vulnerability of the people, because drug and alcohol and pregnancy is an area that people really don't want to speak about, and there's a lot of stigma attached to this issue. It affords an opportunity to travel, and I certainly traveled to Canada and America, and I met with fantastic people, and they were equally as passionate as I was, so I learned a huge amount of things. And then when I came back to Australia, it was like, what am I going to do? I had so much information. I did a lot of presentations. I was interviewed by ABC in the area of drug and alcohol use and how we can help people to reduce the impact of this, particularly on development of children. I've provided Carers WA with presentations, and within my health network, I was also involved and invited to Parliament to look at some strategies that we can build on for methamphetamine use and opioids, as opposed added to the FASD or fetal alcohol spectrum disorder body of work. So it's a really great opportunity that I would absolutely tell each and every one of you in the room what you're passionate about, get it down and get it out and put your application in. My words of wisdom, or my pearls of wisdom for you, is to allow yourself plenty of preparation, because it's one thing to have the passion, but as Adam says, these applications will open and they'll close on the 1st of May. Don't leave it. Start preparing. Listen to yourself. What is it that you're passionate about? What is it that you want to change? And then get that down. Then speak to other people. I went and I sought out people who had achieved a Winston Churchill Fellowship. I actually set up meetings with them. I actually chose the people for my referees. They were the number one, because they would actually give me that, I suppose, confidence that if I did get to an interview and was awarded the fellowship, that they would vouch for the work that I do. So preparation, I just want to leave you with this quote. So preparation for tomorrow is hard work today. So don't leave it to the last minute. Get on track. If you want to reach out, certainly there's plenty of people across Australia that have done this. And if there are people here from Western Australia or even nationally, and you have a passion in the area of vulnerability, family domestic violence, or intergenerational drug and alcohol use, please feel free to reach out and ask for my help. So I want to wish you all the best of luck, and thank you very much for allowing me time to share my journey with you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Angela. That was great. I love hearing what our fellows have been doing and how they got there and where they're going. And I promise we didn't collaborate on that message, which was to get in early and start on the applications, don't leave it to the last minute. But that's obviously what we mean. So introducing my second Churchill Fellow tonight, Simone Carson. Her Churchill Fellowship was to improve food rescue in Australia by examining best practices globally. And you may know Simone is the co-founder of SecondBite. Its purpose is to rescue food that would ordinarily end up in landfill and redistribute it to local charities around Australia. And that's a huge battle. I know I spent a lot of time in my house trying to stop food waste. You know, it's a challenge, and at a scale that Simone's doing it. Her food rescue organisation started with an initial collection of 100 kilograms of surplus food in 2005, and in financial year 2019 rescued over 19.4 million kilograms of food. Think about that nationally, 19.4 million kilograms. That's crazy. So I'd love to introduce now Simone to talk to us about her fellowship.
Thanks, Adam. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. Yes, as Adam said, my project was the exploration of food rescue and distribution around the world. And I was awarded my fellowship in 2018. I travelled in 2019 and I submitted my project in 2020. Now, I submitted it slightly later than what was normally expected, in part because we were considered an emergency service and we've been helping with the floods of 2019, then the fires of early 2020, and then the pandemic. And the reason I mention that is I just want to highlight the support that the Trust can provide in terms of working with you as you need to, depending on the circumstances when you come back from your travels and getting that project out and about. So my itinerary was to travel to London and Dublin, Paris, Oslo, Copenhagen, New York, and Canada. And I was to be away for 6 weeks. Now, during that time, I also ended up exploring, because of some of the things that Angela and Adam have mentioned, I had opportunities to meet with some people in LA, Brussels, Milan, Amsterdam. And then when I returned, because I had so much information and wanted to speak to other people, I had phone conversations with people in Washington, Philadelphia, Maine, and Vancouver. It's a lot of information, but I think it also highlights how complex the problem of food waste and food security is. Now, for my project, what I decided to do was to email every organisation that I was going to visit, and I asked them a series of questions, 4 questions. What would be the lever to allow you to do more and better within the work that you're doing that would ignite change? What would be the roadblock that stops you being able to deliver on your mission, your purpose, or your hope? And can you provide an example of real collaboration that you're most proud of? And the last question was, how important is innovation in driving the mission? Is technology important to you? Do you use apps or purpose-driven software? Which was really exciting. And in while I was traveling, or before I was about to travel, actually, I looked at how would I want to present all the information that I was going to gather. So I set up an Instagram page and I created tiles before I left and some while I was away, so that people could follow my journey while I was traveling. And that in part was part of my project to deliver to the Trust, but I also obviously had a written document to present. I ended up with 10 recommendations, and they were leadership, the power of a coordinated system approach by government at all levels of government, state, federal and local, to work with not-for-profits in this area, partnerships in the new economy, looking at Google supporting food banks in France to be able to make sure that we get as much food from one area of France to another area as easily as possible. The debate around best before, best by dates on our food. There are countries in the world that are running programs, education programs around going back to what our grandparents did or what we might have done as children, which was the sniff, look, taste, rather than worrying about a label on food. Capacity and fundraising, how do we keep the lights on in an organisation like ours as a not-for-profit? Technology, a big one here, collaboration, advocacy, volunteering, and then other opportunities in our sector like gleaning, which is a collection of food from a paddock or a pasture after it's been harvested. So volunteers go in and collect whatever hasn't been harvested. And also backyard harvesting for those who have apple, lemon, orange trees, and instead of letting the food rot on the ground, could we possibly get volunteers to collect that? There's an agency in LA that does just that. Now, highlights for me while I was away, I think, you could read my report if you wanted to, but the highlight personally for me was the willingness of people to give me time. And without question, as Angela has mentioned, the Churchill Fellowship opens doors. There were people that I was able to meet and talk with and spend time with that perhaps would never have made time for me if I hadn't been awarded this fellowship. So they gave me time, and it was interesting. They fell into easy conversation. They were incredibly generous with sharing of their data, of sharing of their projects, and they were very interested in what was happening in Australia and in myself and in our organisation and our sector, actually. A highlight for me was the spontaneity, the opportunities to, because I was in Europe and someone had mentioned someone who was doing something pretty amazing in Milan, and I could get a cheap flight. This wasn't organised before I went away. I could get a cheap flight and a train and travel down and spend the day with that organisation. And the same I did the same to Rotterdam. So that wasn't my base. I just went down. I had a day meeting with these people and looking at completely different areas in my project, but was incredibly helpful to me. Something that was a little bit of fun and I wasn't expecting was when I was in Oslo, the food bank there that had spent a lot of time talking to me about best before and use by dates said, oh, we've got a presentation this afternoon. It will be in Danish, but why don't you come with us? And there was a representative of the government, a representative of the food bank, and also a representative of food producers. And it was so much fun because they're all such passionate people. And even though I didn't speak the language and couldn't understand everything that was being said, it was amazing how much I could decipher because they were very like-minded people and they were very generous. And afterwards, some people helped translate things that I wasn't sure about. Another highlight for me was that connection to others. I came back and very quickly we had COVID and the lockdowns, and I was able to ring people in Canada and ask, you're an emergency service, how are you protecting your workforce? I had the same questions coming to me from smaller organisations in the UK and Ireland who were wondering what we were doing over here. And I think, it was a real challenge and a growth for me. We talked about that. That's not the only reason why you go on these projects, but it helps for you when you get back and you're delivering it. There was an enormous amount of growth for myself and confidence. I had to stand up and share my story and share the story of the sector here in Australia with people that I'd never met before who were doing incredible things. And I had a real sense of responsibility of sharing what other people in Australia were doing, not just what SecondBite was doing. I think, Winston Churchill said, with opportunity comes responsibility. My travel showed that I was right in the topics that I'd chosen that I wanted looked at. Other people were also looking at these areas and were troubled by some of the things that I had been. I just touched a little bit on the preparation because I think that's really important for all of you tonight. As has been said, and none of us spoke together, I think it's really worth doing as much as you can pre-trip, whilst allowing some flexibility to your schedule for your exploration of things that will pop up in that time. I spent quite a lot of time before going thinking about how and who I would be sharing my results with. And that's why I started that Instagram page, as well as collecting lots of notes while I was away and translating those into a form that I could use to write up my report when I got back. I think when you're going on a bigger trip, some of you might be going on a bigger trip like I was, you can get overwhelmed and it can be very distracting because there is so much information. So you need to take care of yourself. You need to make sure that you have some time to go exploring the city or the town that you're visiting, to have a weekend, to make sure you don't feel that responsibility that you have to work every single day. And the trustees and the people at Churchill Trust really supported that with me, and were very reassuring that it was okay to have a day off if you needed it to recharge yourself. Look, before I went away, I also went and spoke to everyone, all the CEOs in food rescue organisations around the country. There's another 3 of them, and let them know what I was doing, and that I would be sharing that information. I also went to Vic Health, the current CEO and the past CEO, to talk to them about their contacts and was I actually going to visit the right people. And what was very special too is that the Churchill Trust introduced me to other fellowship awardees who were in Canberra and Sydney, and I was able to have telephone conversations. And actually, when I was in Canberra one time, I met up with one of them, and I found that incredibly helpful. I think you always feel comfortable and willing to contact someone from the trust. I found them incredibly cooperative and encouraging and helpful. They're there, they want to see you succeed, and they want to do everything they can to help you. So I really encourage you to give it a go. I'm just going to share my screen and a couple of photos to, let's see if this works. And, you know, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. It's also what it takes to sit down and listen. And I did a lot of listening. You must do the things that you think you cannot do. So if anyone's sitting there and thinking, oh, this is going to be too much for me, it's not. It'll be wonderful. And I really encourage you to give it a go. This is me in the UK in one of the warehouses with the team there that was showing me around how they collect and distribute. This is in Oslo, another warehouse, lots of warehouses in Holland where they're doing something incredibly different, where they've got, they set up little supermarkets with rescue food. One of the most generous and collaborative organisations is in Toronto called Second Harvest. There's nothing that they do that they aren't willing to share to anyone around the world. So they're incredibly collaborative, and they also do a lot of really significant work with remote in their remote Indigenous communities where they have issues around transport and weather. And also, I just wanted to put this up because it's where I start. This is in LA, and Curtis Stone. Now, he was someone I know through Coles and through SecondBite. He's an ambassador for us, but I knew him and knew that he does a lot of work in America. It's in his restaurant in LA, does a lot of work in community. And I thought, well, I'm in LA, I might just stop and ask him to have a coffee with me and talk me through what are some of the issues in America that might create food insecurity. And it was fantastic to have that kind of background before I set off. So just wanted to show you different options, different ways of perhaps doing things and tackling your project as well. I wish you all well, and I'm very happy to chat to anyone at any stage, even if it's not tonight, on and support you through the process. Good luck.
Excellent, thanks, Simone. Another fantastic presentation. I'll get you to, I'll get you to leave your camera on, and Angela might want to appear as well, and I'll work through some questions. I've got a few. I've already answered some, as has my colleague, so they're in the answered column. And I've tried to save a few here so we can everyone can hear them. So someone has asked if we're able to apply for 2 different topics, and I would say probably not going to be your best application. I think pick one and focus on it, because people like Simone and Angela are very clear about what their project was. So that's important. And someone's asked, what if your project falls under community and education? That's a common question. So those categories we have, just pick one that you think is most appropriate. If one of our panels looks at it and goes, education. I think this is more community, and they'll talk to the community people and get them to assess it. It's really just to help us give you the best assessment that we can. And it also helps us, I guess, keep an eye on whether we've got strengths or weaknesses in particular areas where we're attracting applications from. Sue has said she's in the process of compiling information for her application and plans on timing the trip around a conference in Europe or a symposium in Texas in 2024. Neither have information available, or either costs or accommodation, etc. How can you overcome it? So there's two ways you can do that. I think a lot of people look for a previous conference, unless it's first of its type. Look for what the previous one was. That's probably all you can do, because it's not uncommon for them not to have come out. And so that way we can have a sense of what it might cost. So I think that's probably the only thing you really can do. So as I said, you can depart from 1 November. Someone's asked what's the last date by which one must end the journey? Well, hopefully not forever. We did have one fellow, and we've awarded over 4,500 who never came back. I think he met someone overseas, and anyway, so these things happen. But no, in all seriousness, you can leave from 1 November. We have a 12-month window from which to depart, and then you come back when you've finished. So you might not come back till 2025 if you leave right at the end of that window. And this kind of links up to another question. Someone asked, is it possible to undertake a trip beyond the 8 weeks at the fellow's own expense? So you might want to do further study, visit family, etc. Or are you expected to come back after the 8 weeks? So this is the cool thing about a Churchill Fellowship. It is very freeing. If you want to take, and you can afford to take some extra time to get a holiday in wherever you want in the world, doesn't have to be the countries you visited on your fellowship. Yeah, you can do that. You can take your family out, again, at your expense, with you on your fellowship if you want to, or you can leave them at home if you prefer. It's entirely your choice. Some people get their family along towards the end of the fellowship, and then they go and have a bit of a holiday. And this might sound like a bit of a lighthearted thing, but it's also very serious. If you're going to do some kind of adventure sport, can I just implore you to plan that at the end? Because if you're halfway through your fellowship and you go skiing and you break a leg, and this has happened to a fellow, you have to come back to Australia. And it's really hard to find that momentum and time again to do the rest of your fellowship. So keep that one in mind, but absolutely you can extend your travel. Referees, do they get called or just fill in the text? So look, every referee fills out the form and answers the questions, but they also might get called. So that is true. Not necessarily every referee gets called, but certainly we have that option to give them a call. So that may present a problem if they're not contactable, but look, doesn't tend to be a big issue for us at all. Matt's just sort of made the observation that a lot of fellowships that he's seen are for projects working directly on social or environmental challenges, but his work is in developing new collaborative innovation processes, governance structures and things like that, a bit less direct, but could apply across a range of different areas. Have there been successful fellows doing this kind of work before? So the answer is yes. We've had people looking at, innovation ecosystems and all sorts of things. So I'd say if you're sort of wondering about the fellowships we award, go to our website and there's a little search icon at the top, and click on that, opens up a search bar, and just start typing in a keyword, and it'll throw up automatically. It's a pretty smart search system. So if you type in innovate or innovation or governance, those things will come up. And you can get a really good idea. It's quite fun, actually. Just go in there and think, I wonder if there's been a fellowship on, pick a word, and you'll be surprised what might pop up. So that's good advice for anyone wanting to do some research. Simone.
And just feeding what you're saying, I remember, in case this helps anyone listening, I remember when I was awarded at Government House, the group that I was with had incredibly diverse projects. There weren't that many doing social causes actually at all. There was, some people looking at, there was someone in craft, someone in music, all sorts of range of projects. There was a dog therapy. I'm just thinking of one in the court systems. There's such a range. Policing was absolutely so interesting.
Wig making, I think that might have been your year. It's a lot. It's true. So is it possible to take, if you're lucky enough to get a first interview, online if you're overseas at the time? So I guess the answer is yes, that can happen. But I'm going to, like, my word of caution this year, if you're overseas and you're saying, I really need this Churchill Fellowship because, you know, going overseas is like my dream and I want to learn the stuff. Don't always say, I can't make the interview, I'm overseas. Oh, I can't get to this interview, I'm overseas. Might not go so well. And I know people travel, of course, a lot these days, but just think carefully if you really need to tell us that you're overseas and can't make an interview or something. If it might be for your honeymoon or for a holiday, that's fine. But just yeah, we can do it. We do prefer people to attend interviews if they can face to face, because often that's a better dynamic and experience. But absolutely, we can do online interviews. And like everyone, COVID was a real shift for us culturally. I was quite pleased to see it. We're allowing more Zoom interviews, particularly for people that might have to travel quite a long way to get to a capital city. I think that's much fairer and a better outcome. Do partnering organisations you visit receive an honorarium? You tell me. That depends where you're going. We're not necessarily going to pay it. So that sort of depends. Yeah, I've seen it a bit. Some universities like to think they should charge for their time, and maybe that's reasonable. But if you're undertaking Churchill Fellowship, I think we kind of expect that people aren't going to charge for their time, but that can happen. If it's not exorbitant, then you could include that as a fee request in your application. But I think use it sparingly. Don't sort of expect that we're going to be paying honorariums to everyone that you visit. People are generally very generous with their time for Churchill Fellows. And would the Trust assist in sourcing contacts for your research and learning, and to what extent, or do we need to source by ourselves? I'm sorry to say we absolutely really won't be very good at helping you source contacts, because it's just such a broad range of areas. We just don't have octopus legs everywhere. But that said, and I think we've touched on this tonight, I've yet to meet a Churchill Fellow who wouldn't be happy to have a yak with another Churchill Fellow. So get onto our website, find some Churchill Fellowship recipients who have done something in a similar field. There's a contact form on every Churchill Fellows profile page, including our two speakers tonight. You can put a request in to be connected with them. We'll forward that request on, and you can have a conversation with them and ask them about, you know, what they know, what their networks look like. So that's the amazing thing about being a Churchill Fellow. Simone touched on that. There's just so many people like Simone and Angela who you can talk to and share their insights and learnings. Someone's asked about how much time do you have when you return to produce your report, or whatever format that might be in. Look, you usually have like 8 weeks. Sometimes people ask for an extension. Like at the moment, we've got 2 years worth of fellows travelling because of COVID. So we're taking a bit longer than normal, and we're quite happy to give people a bit of extra time, you know, for us to review them. So yeah, you get a little bit of time on that, and we're not, you know, we'll give you an extension if you really need it, kind of thing. For applicants with young families, are there options for young children to accompany them for part of the trip? That's kind of really up to you, whether you have, you know, the capacity to, or someone to go travel with your children and meet you, or some people do take, you know, people take very young babies with them on the trip, but it just depends on you. We won't obviously be able to fund their airfares and things, but you're absolutely welcome to take your kids on. It can be a fantastic experience they might not ever get again, or they might remember for the rest of their lives. How to best mitigate crossing over with a past project that might look similar to your own? Well, that's an interesting question. And I think, look, things move so quickly. And I think we see this more and more. Look at the rapid changes that came from a pandemic, right? So just because we funded a project 3 years ago, I think the world's changed a lot in that time. We're not going to not fund those projects again if they're very similar. That said, you know, do your best to get in touch with that fellow and talk to them, and, you know, come to us and say, look, you know, I've spoken to Angela, she did that Shiway work, you know, my work is very similar, but we've talked about it, and there's been some significant shifts, and, you know, I'm going to build on that. So, you know, get in touch with the fellows. We don't mind kind of reinvesting in things that take it further. So I think that's okay. You know, how detailed does the itinerary need to be? We asked you to put in sort of half-week blocks, so it doesn't have to be every day, every hour, just sort of half-week blocks across that 4 to 8 weeks. in assessing the applications, does the panel consider the applicant's experience, qualification, or publication in their proposed topic, or if the application is strong on its own merits, those factors are irrelevant? So absolutely, we'll think about, like, the assessors will consider your experience, yes. Your qualification, if it's relevant. Publications, again, if it's relevant. So, you know, I guess we do consider, so we'll, in your application form, we'll ask you for any sort of your work experience, relevant volunteering you might have done, qualifications, all those sorts of things, and that all paints a picture of who you are and what you might be able to do. Is there a list of the topics online? So look, anything. So like literally any topic, how to, you know, improve the way we do Zoom meetings. I don't know, whatever it is that you can put a case for. In terms of the categories that we do, look, there's 7 categories: land, commerce and logistics, health and medicine, arts, education. You know, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Just focus on what your approach is. I don't care what the category is. It'll fall in there somewhere, right? So don't worry about that. Just focus on what it is that you're passionate about doing, and let us worry about cramming it into some sort of category for our assessments. Can you share your findings in government and yearly innovation events? Yes, please. We'd love that. So we actually have a program we do called the Policy Impact Program, and we select some fellows to go up to Parliament House, and we get meetings with ministers and advisors and government departments. It's amazing. And it's in relation to policy issues, but it doesn't have to be policy. But yeah, absolutely. If you can share your findings, that's what we want. That's an expectation for sure. Can you travel in Australia and overseas? Well, look, I think the only real exception we've made to that is if you live in a very remote community, and travel to Australia is still going to be quite beneficial. Otherwise, you can travel in Australia, go for it now. When you've done that and you know what's happening in Australia, then apply for a Churchill Fellowship, and we'll help you get overseas to do it. So that's kind of really the intent of the Churchill Fellowship. Is this... someone's asked if there's a view on controversial topics or topics that are only increasingly becoming mainstream. Oh, we've had some controversial topics. Don't worry about that. I think typically we get applications on emerging things that are emerging in the community and issues that are becoming, you know, nationally significant. Like I bet we'll get lots on data retention and think about Optus data breaches, things like that. We'll get things on those because it's in the public view and mind now. But equally, we'll get some very unusual things we haven't really heard of, and you go, oh, I'd never thought of that, you know, and they're the ones that we love as well. So we don't sort of have a quota or a set expectation of which topics we'll support, apart from those sponsored ones, of course, which we do try and honour. I hope that helps answer that question. Is there an example budget on the website? There isn't, because you don't have to worry about that. So I'm not going to tell you what the cheapest one ever was or what the dearest one ever was, but they're typically around $30,000. That's the kind of value. But it's not about the money. It's about what you want to achieve and where you want to go. And that's what we focus on. So don't worry about the cost. And assessing the applications, does the panel consider the applicant's experience? Oh, no, I've done that one. Sorry, I'm reading that again. Lucas Patchett, hello, welcome from Orange Sky. What if there are 2 people from the same organisation applying? That can happen. You might see a little fight break out if you've got very similar projects. That's fine if 2 people apply from the same organisation. And look, quite possible 2 people from the same organisation could be awarded in the same year. That could happen. If your projects are very similar, though, it probably won't. So yeah, probably have a chat with the other person. What else? Got a couple more questions and we're running out of time. What if your topic broadly overlaps? No, I've done that one. I think we're down to the last question now. Have you come across anyone who has taken more of a place-based approach to their topic? When I first started planning, I was looking at other models for approaching my topic of interest, which is workforce housing in coastal tourism reliant towns. But more and more, I'm interested in how other similar communities have addressed this issue. So looking across different actors, sectors within specific communities. Thinking about that, yes, I think that's probably kind of that approach encapsulates the Churchill Fellowship. You're going to different places, different cultures, different contexts to see how they're dealing with largely the same thing. So if I've interpreted your question there, Kiri, I think that sounds absolutely what the Churchill Fellowship is about. So I think scrolling through all these questions that are flying in, that is probably the last question. So on that note, I'm going to say a wholehearted thank you to Angela, thank you to Simone, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in. Please, apply, do your best. If you've got any questions, follow up with the Trust, and good luck and good night.